This is Hillsborough, the home of Sheffield Wednesday Football Club. On the 15th of April 1989, it was the scene of the worst disaster in British football history.
That day, 96 people tragically lost their lives, crushed in two small standing areas in the stadium. 30 years later, and the issue of standing at football remains contentious.
It's very sensitive because this is people's lived experiences. This isn't like a hypothetical for lots of people. This was real life. And the Lord Justice Taylor report that introduced all-seater stadia was as a consequence of Hillsborough. So for a long time, that's been the document that's defined Hillsborough.
The Taylor report, an inquiry into the question of safe spectating at football matches, concluded in part that, while standing accommodation is not intrinsically unsafe, all-seater stadia bring benefits to spectator comfort, safety and crowd control. To this day, there are no standing terraces in the top tiers of English football. But this could be about to change.
And Manchester United have been given permission to trial safe standing at Old Trafford. Plans have been approved for 1,500 barrier seats in the northeast quadrant of the stadium.
In this episode, we ask, what impact will Manchester United's stadium plans have on safe standing in English football?
It's part of the journey onto the road of safe standing being allowed in football grounds again.
Ian Stirling is Vice Chair of Manchester United Supporters Trust and Fans Forum rep.
It's seen from the supporters' point of view as part of the journey to get us back to where we used to be, but obviously in safer surroundings. It's part of who we are as football supporters. Not all football supporters, obviously, some people do wish to sit down. But there's still a sizable element who see standing as football as an important part of the game. I grew up on the Stretford end, and the first game at Old Trafford was 1973. Funnily enough, I did sit down because we were fenced in then, and there was a nice hot pipe in winter that run around the front of the ground. So when I was a kid, I actually used to sit down at the front. But you graduate in time as you grew up, and as you went with bigger groups of friends, you would be able to all stand together. It was about that sense of community, your shared passion, and being able to demonstrate that. The Stretford end, as with many popular ends in football, tends to be the most vibrant ends, most vocal and creating atmosphere. That was taken away from us. It always felt like an injustice that this enforced way of watching football was put on us without our consultation and without our agreement. As the years went on, it was seen as a wrong done to those section of supporters who wish to stand at football. So it was always a passionate campaign for me that is just much more than about just being able to stand. It's about having that choice taken away from us. There's nothing wrong with sitting at football. There's room for everyone. There's room for all, whether it be from private boxes to corporate visitors to foreign visitors, people who come to Old Trafford for one match in their lifetime. There should be room for everyone and everyone should be accommodated. But that choice was taken away from us.
Last week it was announced that Manchester United are going to be allowed to install rail seating in their ground. What exactly does rail seating mean in this context? What's going to happen to J Stand in Old Trafford?
Well, basically, rail seats are that. They're seats with a rail. So you have a seat in front and it's a barrier. So in effect, if you can imagine, it's something that you could lean on. But it's also a safety measure. As football supporters, we'll all know people who've taken a tumble over the seat in front at times in moments of celebration. So the actual structure is basically just seats with a barrier. Now, there are different kinds of rail seats. A lot of people know the German models of a metal seat with a back, with a barrier, and obviously these are joined up to create the stand. In J Stand itself, it's a quadrant in the corner of the ground. All the people standing there at present, and it's been accepted by club. It's been accepted in terms of management of the area by stewards. It will mean that supporters, in effect, will be able to, when they stand safely. We hope the current situation continues where there's an acceptance that supporters in that area want to stand and will continue to stand. So it will be a safety improvement, first and foremost, in the area. but it actually means so much more to supporters. It's the first major shift at Old Trafford since the introduction of the all-seater stadium. So it means different things to different people.
What's the time frame on this? When can we expect to see rail seating in Old Trafford?
We hope to have the change soon. Current events in terms of the coronavirus have overtaken government's thinking and priorities at the minute. If we were in normal times, they would be in there for the start of next season. The start of next season, we just don't know whether that's going to be at the minute. So I suppose the most appropriate answer for that is for they will be in place when supporters are able to watch football in Old Trafford next season.
Can you give us a sense of the history of safe standing at Old Trafford?
It's more of a picture and a story since the introduction of all-seater stadium. We all know the reasons why it was introduced with following the Taylor report in Hillsborough. Supporters at Old Trafford felt something was taken away from them. There was a way of watching football, a camaraderie, a community, a way for like-minded people to be able to watch football in a certain way. And it was by no means saying that everyone wanted to watch football the same way. There was always a need for seating as well. But supporters saw this as an aggressive move towards them of breaking up their communities and the way they watch football. It's something as various supporter organisations at United have fought for, which in many cases led to sanctions, ejections, bans, even arrests in some cases, just for people wanting to stand at football. So there's been a continual campaign from United supporters in support of the FSF, now the FSA. It's been a long campaign. Pressure was built up more recently, maybe in the past 5 years. It became more publicly accepted for clubs to support the view that supporters should be able to stand at football. So we've worked pretty hard with the club over the years to win the arguments, win over supporters, answer all the questions, overcome all the obstacles to be in the current position where there's actually a change to the Green Guide, which is put in place by the SGSA, Sports Ground Safety Authority, where rail seats can be installed. So it's been part of a journey, and quite obviously the journey's not over yet, but it's still a major step. That has led us to the position that we're in now. It's a similar story, I would guess, in most football clubs throughout the country.
In Hanover, we've only had positive experiences with safe standing. The atmosphere is a lot better here than in other sections. We sell tickets for each block, so you can choose who you want to stand with. It's a lot easier singing while you're standing. It's a lot safer because we have these crash barriers so you can't fall off. As soon as you score a goal, people meet up and celebrate together, and you've got no chance of falling down. So.
Safe standing is a staple of German football, and it's one of the reasons why a lot of people go over and visit Germany to experience the fan culture over there. Tell us a little bit about your trip to Germany to experience safe standing.
When United were playing German opposition in Europe, we would take the opportunity to invite club officials along to view the areas of safe standing in football clubs with the cooperation of John Darch, who's got some fantastic contacts in Germany and speaks the language as well, so that became a good barrier for us. We had the cooperation of the clubs that we were visiting as well. So it tends to be before the games, we go along and have a look at the facilities. We'd have the German club's SLO, supporter liaison officer, with us as well. We'd basically do a Q&A, show people the facilities. So rather than just talking about an image for people, it would help our discussions with the club about what we wanted to see at Old Trafford. So it's almost an overcoming objections exercise and actually pointing out the benefits. A few of our colleagues have been invited over to Germany to see Borussia Dortmund actually experience the safe standing areas. Everything was positive about it. People have seen German football on TV and seen what they've been able to build in those sections. All the things really, kind of things that we've been taking away. The sense of community, camaraderie, vocal atmosphere, and friends being able to go to the football together, stand together, and be part of a positive experience.
So how important is this decision for fans of football?
I always think it's your most fanatical, fervent supporters who want to stand, and they bring something to the game, and what they bring to the game now I see as being valued more, and I think that's why we're seeing this change towards safe standing, to try and almost encapsulate what it is to be a football supporter, to be one of the most loyal supporters, people who follow the club everywhere and get behind the team whenever they can and as loud as they can. It's always been a passion of mine to be able to stand at football. Now we'll be able to do it safely, and hopefully that day is soon when the government will come along and give the green light to safe standing at football.
This all sounds very promising, but how did we get from Hillsborough to here? John Darch runs the Safe Standing Roadshow and has spent the last decade lobbying clubs, politicians and fans about the benefits of safe standing in football.
The ban on standing is illogical, is discriminatory against football fans in that it imposes a lack of choice on football fans that isn't imposed on fans of other sports who, if they wish, can choose to stand to watch their particular sport.
You've been pushing for safe standing in British football for a long time now. Tell us about how you ended up taking up the cause.
It really goes back to when I started watching football with my father many years ago in 68, 69, as a small boy on the open terrace at Ashton Gate, Bristol City. And then later watched in the grandstand with him, but then in my teens, watched with my schoolmates in the covered terrace and thoroughly enjoyed that. And then 20 years later, after living away from Bristol for a while, came back, was taking my nephew to Ashton Gate when he was about 13, and by then it's North Cedar Stadium. And at 13, it was probably appropriate for him to be with a grown-up. But by the time he and his brother got to sort of 16, 17, I thought what a shame it was that they couldn't experience the same rite of passage, if you like, of having a bit of independence, of standing with their mates, singing their hearts out, having a bit of fun. I started to become aware of the Safe Standing campaign over the next few years, started to get involved with the FSF. And because a zillion years ago, I studied German, and we had all become aware of Variositze in Germany, they said, would I speak to some of the German clubs and find out if there was any reason why rail seats would not be appropriate, technically, size-wise, weight-wise, dimension-wise, whatever. Discussions with them, discussions with one or two of the manufacturers over there led to the idea in my head of a roadshow, and I got one of the manufacturers in this country to build me a roadshow, and then spent 7, 8, 9 years running around the country showing the concept of rail seats to clubs, fans, media, politicians.
Obviously, one of the important concepts that you're talking about here is rail seating. Can you talk us through what rail seating is?
But if you imagine a normal stadium seat, you're standing in the row behind, you look down to your feet, and what you see is the curved back of a piece of plastic that comes half up your shins. So if the person behind you gets overexcited when you score a last-minute winner and falls forward onto you, you're probably going to fall forward over that piece of plastic. Imagine, though, what you had in front of you was a metal waist-high rail held up by the uprights either side of the seat in front of you, and looking to your left and looking to your right, what you saw was that rail continuing with uprights between each seat. Therefore, if a fan behind you gets overexcited, they won't fall forward onto you because they're supported by a rail. And if you get overexcited, you won't fall forward into the seat in front of you either because there's a rail in front of you. It's a seat. It might be a plastic one. It might be a metal one. There are different styles out there. But there is a seat. So if the club plays in Europe and the ground has to be in all-seater configuration, or if it's a Premier League and not Championship ground or ground covered by the all-seater policy right now, and it has to have a seat, there is a seat there. But the most important thing is that seat is set within a frame which comes up 900 mil above the height of the tread you're standing on. So you've got somewhere to rest your hands and steady yourself if you get overexcited when that last-minute winner goes in.
The main story this evening, 74 football supporters are reported to have been crushed to death at the FA Cup final at Hillsborough in Sheffield this afternoon. Hundreds more were injured. Fans rushed through a broken turnstile, crushing Liverpool supporters against the front of the stand.
The important moment in the history of standing in British football is the Hillsborough Stadium disaster. Could you talk us through the impact that Hillsborough had on standing in stadiums?
Well, I think actually standing in stadiums was under threat even before Hillsborough. The Thatcher government were already looking at it as a means of combating hooliganism, a very blunt instrument to do so. And I think in 88, perhaps early 89, they would have liked to have brought it in, but didn't think that public opinion would have gone along with the idea. And then Hillsborough happened.
Members on both sides of this House and people throughout the country will regard her decision to force through her identity card scheme to be an offence against common sense and an offence against common decency. Will the Right Honourable Lady tell us, how can she, in the aftermath of that terrible tragedy last Saturday, put the safety of others second to her own pride?
To refuse to pass the bill this session, to deal with problems already identified, and then to leave ourselves with no vehicle by which to respond immediately to the lessons from Hillsborough, including an all-seating stadium, would be a very grave decision for this House.
Hillsborough, in effect, gave them, in my personal opinion, the opportunity to bring in their draconian banning of standing on the premise that Hillsborough had been caused by standing. Now, we all know, of course, the Taylor report said it wasn't, the independent panel report said it wasn't, the coroner's verdict said it wasn't. So we know that was a lie, but it served the purpose of the Thatcher government in the same way that they were trying that spring and that summer to introduce the national ID card scheme, where every football fan, whether they were an 80-year-old grandfather or a 10-year-old little girl, would have had to carry an ID card to get into a football game. That blunt instrument was one of their ideas for combating hooliganism. And during the process of the Taylor report, when it became obvious he was going to scupper that and say it would actually, had that been in place, that Hillsborough would have made the congestion outside Leppings Lane worse than it was, Thatcher put pressure on him to say, basically, if you're not going to give me my ID card scheme, you must at least give me all-seater stadia. I would suggest, probably against his better judgment, he conceded and did that. And so we've got all-seater stadia, the ruling that we had to have them from 1990 onwards, on the basis of a lie. The lie that Hillsborough was caused by standing, and we all know now that it wasn't.
Can you give us a sense of the history of standing in football from Hillsborough onwards? What are the most important moments in that history?
Well, I think, first of all, it's important to recognise that the clubs were against it. The Labour Party were against it. All the big clubs left their major cop, their big home end, to last. They were given 3 seasons, the teams who were then in the top 2 divisions. By 1994, they had to be all-seater. The idea was they could convert one stand one year, one stand another year, one stand the next year, one terrace. They all left their big cops to last. Liverpool left the cop to last. The fans on the cop at Liverpool used to sing, "You'll never seat the cop," because they all hoped, the big clubs, that the government would compromise at some point and say, OK, the stadia have got to have more seats, they've got to be safer places, but standing in its totality has not got to go, and therefore you can keep your big home end. So that's an important thing to realise. It's also important to realise that an unintended consequence of the all-seater policy was a huge increase in ticket prices, which Taylor didn't predict, and, of course, a new safety hazard, and that is fans standing behind seats that only come halfway up their shins and over which it's very easy to fall. That safety hazard was never imagined. Fans have been campaigning for 20 plus years. The FSF Safe Standing campaign has the name Safe Standing, which actually is a bad name. If you're sitting down to begin a marketing campaign or promotional campaign now, you wouldn't want to use a word that implied that some forms of standing were unsafe. And you probably wouldn't want to use the word standing when that's a red rag to a bull to some politicians. But it was born out of a campaign, and this gives you an idea how far back it goes, when Man City were about to move from Main Road to Eastlands. So you might remember, the area where the Etihad was called Eastlands, and their local campaign was Standing Areas for Eastlands. And as an acronym, that was SAFE. And the guy, Phil Gatenby, who was leading that campaign, became, or was at that time, the lead for the Safe Standing campaign for the FSF. So his Safe Standing Areas for Eastlands campaign morphed into the National Safe Standing campaign. That's been ongoing now for 20 plus years. It's been a long road to get here, but I think we're nearly there.
What do you think the material reasons why we're seeing a return to safe standing now? What has changed?
The message now is a lot clearer. I think in the past, the message the fans were putting across was, we want standing back. And what the politicians were hearing was, we want crumbling terraces again. And although we know that terraces did not cause Hillsborough, in the back of their minds, somewhere lurking there is this slight doubt that perhaps it did. And so the idea of asking politicians to give us terraces back, in my view, was never going to work. I think by putting into their heads that when we say we want safe standing, what we mean is we want the status quo, seats in stadia, but we want a safer form of seating that you can stand behind and not fall over. With all modesty, I think taking the Roadshow around, letting people stand behind a rail seat, let them see, let them feel what they're all about, it's got that message across clearly. And so when politicians and the media and club executives now hear safe standing, what they conjure up in their mind is a picture of a rail seat. We're now 4 years down the road since Celtic put the rail seats in there because the law in Scotland is different. That's helped enormously because it's meant that, again, politicians, safety experts, club executives have been able to go up to Celtic Park and have a look for themselves without somebody like me, pushy salesman or whatever, trying to promote the idea. They can go in a quiet afternoon with the stadium manager at Celtic and have a look around and ask him his experience with them. That has certainly helped. So yeah, the acceptance that it's a good idea has evolved because people realise what we're proposing now is actually safer than what we've currently got. What politician, what safety expert wouldn't want to make things safer?
How important is it that Manchester United are introducing safe standing, and how pivotal will this be for the future of safe standing in football?
Well, I noticed a lot of the press when the United story broke talked about United introducing safe standing. Well, of course they're not. They're introducing rail seats. Just like Spurs and Wolves, they're not allowed to formally operate any area of their ground as a standing area. But they can make areas of their ground where fans already stand in breach of ground regulations safer. And that is, in fact, what the safety authorities have been recommending clubs look at doing for the last 2 years. So they're doing that. But of course, it's also in preparation for the day when they are allowed to operate areas fitted with rail seats and standing areas. And the fact that it's United doing it now, the most famous club in the world, arguably, is fantastic. It sends out a signal to the rest of the football world that if it's good enough for United, surely it's good enough for club X, Y, and Z. Just because it is United and it's got so much media exposure, the rest of the world sits up and takes notice. It also is a signal to the politicians that it's not only Wolves, Spurs, but now it is, the biggest club in the land, Man United, clearly are saying to the politicians, we not only want to make our fans safer today, but we would like to operate this area in the future as a standing area. Please press ahead and change the all-seater policy so we can do that.
One of the benefits of safe standing is that it allows you to accommodate more people than in standard seating areas. How do you think the coronavirus pandemic is going to impact the safe standing debates, given that social distancing is swiftly becoming a reality for us?
I think the reality is we're probably not going to have crowds back in football stadia in any density until there's a vaccine. Whether you have a terrace, let's say the Big Bank at Exeter, full to capacity, or whether you have the seated Sir Alex Ferguson stand at Old Trafford full to capacity is no different. I don't think you're going to see fans in any form of accommodation, any form of stadium accommodation, be it seated or standing, before there's a vaccine. So I don't think it has any impact on that. I'll just track back a little bit on the idea that rail seating, safe standing allows an increase in capacity. In certain situations, it will, if the legislation allows. But even if legislation allows, at a ground, say, like Old Trafford, which is an old ground where the seating rows are very narrow, the opportunity there to increase capacity without a lot of structural work will be zero. But in a new stadium, or somewhere like Bramley Moor for Everton, which is 2, 3, 4 years down the road, their designs do incorporate the possibility to increase capacity. You've got some older grounds which are landlocked with rows and rows of terrace houses all around them, so they can't increase the size of the footprint of their ground, but they could potentially reprofile the seating deck and take advantage of the provision that is already in the Green Guide to increase capacity in a rail seat area. So it's a possibility, but it's not a given that every club can do it.
So what does the immediate future of safe standing look like?
This season, 2019-20 season, was a season during which the Sports Ground Safety Authority were doing a season-long piece of research into standing at football grounds. They commissioned a research company and had their own inspectors look at practices among standing fans in grounds with terraces, in grounds with rail seats, and in grounds with no formal standing accommodation at all, where fans were standing behind normal seats. And you may recall that in February, they gave the Sports Minister an interim report, the headline of which was rail seating or seats with barriers have a positive impact on spectator safety. And his view at the time was great, very interesting. I look forward to working with them towards the introduction of safe standing and look forward to their final report in the summer. Now, of course, with football stopping a few weeks ago, that's meant some of their field work couldn't be completed. But my understanding is they are rounding off their study with desk research and will submit their final report to the government in July, if it says the same sort of things as the interim report said, that would then give the government all the evidence they need to scrap or amend or relax the all-seater policy, and there's no real reason for them to delay. One might even argue that with all the bad news around coronavirus, it would be a nice opportunity for them to release a bit of good news, and a piece of good news that would cost the government nothing. Because to say, OK, from now on, clubs, you can not only install rail seats, but the FGSA can prescribe the rules under which you may operate areas fitted with those seats as standing areas. So I think it's not beyond the realms of possibility that by the time crowds come back into English and Welsh stadia, standing is allowed behind rail seats.
So do you anticipate that safe standing will become a reality in British football in the near future?
Yes, I think it could be in the very near future.
Ian Stirling is Vice Chair of Manchester United Supporters Trust and Fans Forum Rep. John Darch runs the Safe Standing Roadshow and has spent the last decade lobbying clubs, politicians and fans about the benefits of safe standing in football. This episode was produced by Josh Schneiderweiler and Hugo Chambray. I'm John Mackenzie. Thanks for listening to Football Today. If you enjoy this podcast, why not subscribe to our Patreon and get a raft of bonus material? Or, if you can't spare the cash, why not help us out by sharing an episode with a friend? See you next time.